Today's subject matter is a little strange. Not because for some young adults it was mildly traumatizing with a slightly confusing plot, or because there was a small bit of controversy around the release of some of the content, mainly gratuitous gore and the death of children. No, it's strange because the manga is not the source material. Not quite, at least. You see, the original manga ran from 1991 to 1992 in the Japanese magazine Comic Nova. Then later, Comic Nova was discontinued, and Genocyber was released as one volume in 1993 in Japan. That same year, Viz Comics released 5 chapters that make up what you will see here. If there's anything beyond that, I can't find it. So why does this add up to not source material? Well, because of a couple of things. The anime also started production in 1991. However, it ended up not releasing until 1994 due to various circumstances. US Manga Corps released the first version in the US, and this was later followed by Manga Entertainment, including it in their Cyberpunk collection. However, only episodes 1 to 3. Today you can find it on Blu-ray in standard definition coming from Discotek Media, who has acquired quite a few of those old properties in recent years. Additionally, the manga and the anime are not the same story. While this anime is called by some an adaptation, the manga seems to sort of serve as a prequel. All articles I can find, though, say it was simply never finished. The only person who could answer the question about the true relationship between the two, in my mind, of course would be the creator of the manga, Tony Takazaki. And if you want to know more about Tony, well, he's either written things that are absolutely hilarious, like parodies of Gundam and Evangelion, or things that are, well, Genocyber or AD Police. Regardless, we're covering Genocyber today, and unlike our previous endeavors, we're covering the manga first because of its prequel-like nature. I think you'll see that the manga really should have been continued. The anime, though I have said it serves as a kind of sequel, it really has to be taken as its own property to enjoy it. I enjoy both, but I think you'll see what I mean. There isn't a whole lot of information out there about the anime or the manga, so we'll just be moving right into it. If you're new, it's all spoilers from here. Also, there's going to be some graphic content, so fasten your seatbelts. We're taking off now. The prologue of the manga is going to hit us with that old trope of showing us the result of the preceding story first, and we open like our recent materials have, with text. The power of megacorporations had outstripped that of the world's governments. The people followed the orders of the corporations, served them, and were allowed to exist only as their subjects. Laws were powerless against the feuds between the corporate powers. The city became a battle zone between the covert forces of corporate assassins. Now, in this hellish metropolis, a single warrior born of the struggle is unleashed. As always, my love for drawn cityscapes is cemented further into my brain. But there is a trenchcoat-wearing, nearly nude, bald womanoid wearing sunglasses, and a security guard is trying to stop her. He tells her the place is off limits and demands ID, and the being removes the sunglasses, revealing some very strange eyes before grabbing the guard by the shoulders. This understandably startles him, and even more so when the being opens her mouth to reveal an eyeball. Whatever is in her eye sockets extends and becomes drills, which she uses to bore into the security guard's skull. Another guard emerges from a doorway to see the scene, and the being's appearance frightens him. He runs, and the being takes to the chase. The guard rounds a corner and catches his breath. He reaches for an alarm button, but a voice comes from above, telling him, forget it. He yells, who's there? And it is revealed a second humanoid is clinging to the rafters above. It tells him that depending on what he does, it might let him live. But this is a lie. A saw blade emerges from the being's face, and it dives down at the security guard, killing him. We find that there are a total of 3 of these beings, each with a single digit on their forehead. They were after some data, which they got. They've killed 5, injured 12, and they are about to blow up the building. Soon after, the building does explode. As they stand on a roof observing the burning building in the distance, a voice from behind says, Paradigm. This catches their attention, and they look to see a woman standing above them. She calls them paradigms again, and they remark that the woman isn't on their sensors. They ask who she is, and she simply tells them, Genocyber. The humanoids recognize this name and are surprised. One remarks that no matter what, the scanner says she's just an ordinary human. but marks on her hand and forehead which appear make it obvious that is not true. Number 2 dons a cocky grin and says, "It doesn't matter. She has to be erased." And the being summons the saw blade from its face again. Number 3 warns not to be careless. There are 3 unknown points on Genocyber's body that they can't analyze. Genocyber begins to transform, and number 3 repeats, "Unknown, unknown," and warns number 2 again, who only says, "You never know until you try." And as they rush Genocyber, a harsh sound begins to emit from the girl, followed by an explosion which wipes the cocky grin from the face of number 2 as they are thrust back and land shattering and sliding on the ground. As their companion slides past them, the 2 remaining beings look ahead to see the finalized transformation of Genocyber, now having donned what looks like a suit of armor that seems to meld with the flesh. Number 1 questions what happened and takes notice that number 3 is now smoking and seems to be glitching, repeating, "Unknown, unknown." Number 3 continues to try to analyze, concluding that it was some kind of dimensional wave, but it's just too much for the being to take. Their head explodes, and they collapse to the ground. This angers number 1, who turns to face Genocyber again, but Genocyber is just standing there, menacingly. Number 1 begins to transform. Its head drops down to the middle of its chest, and a 3-barrel Gatling gun emerges from its mouth. It begins firing, but Genocyber is too fast and lands a knee to the face of the being, which tries to now use its drill eyes from before. However, Genocyber deflects and grabs the barrels of the gun. It rips the head off and summons wires to control the gun, which it uses to destroy the remaining body. Genocyber notices that number 2 is still alive, though struggling. The number 5 pops up on the lens of the being's eye. Number 2 launches its arm, and Genocyber blasts them off the roof. As number 2 falls, the eye counts down, and then the body detonates, alerting the people in the streets below. Genocyber looks out, and then, in what looks like a painful process, reverts back to her human form, leaving her coughing and exhausted. She looks out over the city as sirens begin to draw close. Chapter 2. We open to 2 young children, Elaine and Diana. Elaine and Diana are twins. One day, Diana foresaw the death of her mother, and 3 days later, her mother died. For some time after that, Diana continued to manifest mysterious powers, but as she matured, they disappeared, leaving only a psychic link peculiar to twins with Elaine. A leap forward in time, and a now teenage Diana is in the chair of some kind of large metal electronic machine. Her father, who is mostly referred to as the Professor throughout this manga, though he is called Professor Morgan about halfway through, is asking her if she is ready. She gives the affirmative, and a giant metal hood from the machine is lowered over her head. The professor shows concern and says to tell him if she has even the slightest bit of discomfort, but her sister Elaine tells him not to worry. She'll know if anything happens. The professor laughs it off and says he's counting on her. A man named Kenneth asks for confirmation, and the professor gives the affirmative to start. The machine Diana is hooked up to is a giant computer called the EX-27. It's trying to draw out Diana's psychic abilities. Soon, the scientists begin monitoring her brain activity and linking in. As they increase the intensity, they ask if Diana is okay, and it's clear that Elaine is on edge. Diana begins to pant, and her blood pressure is rising, but one of the objects they are trying to monitor is starting to show a reaction. Diana in the machine and Elaine outside begin to both sweat and breathe heavier. Elaine grabs her head, and her father asks what's the matter as another scientist alerts him that there are irregularities in Diana's brain waves. He calls to drop the intensity, but Kenneth angrily yells for them to wait. The object, known as the solution, is reacting violently. However, with it more evident that the girls are in pain and being stressed, the professor calls for the abort. Kenneth yells, asking to wait a little longer as the solution begins to react with even more violence. However, both of the girls are screaming now, and despite Kenneth's protest, right as the solution explodes, the professor pushes an emergency button. Elaine drops to the floor, and her father yells for a doctor as he rushes in to check on Diana. Kenneth has an evil grin about the whole situation. The professor holds his head as he sits by the hospital bed of his daughter, Diana. He apologizes, saying he had no idea something so terrible could happen. But Elaine says that the doctors say there's nothing to worry about, and he shouldn't be so hard on himself. Diana agrees, surprising her father with her consciousness. She tells him that they knew there would be risks, and Elaine says that for something bizarre like that to happen, the machine must have great possibilities. So she asks to go next. This upsets her father. He yells that he is canceling the experiment. If he hadn't aborted when he did, something terrible could have happened. Both daughters are surprised, but he continues that he hesitated. He weighed the experiment against his daughter and hesitated. Kenneth is just getting the news that the experiment has been canceled, and this obviously upsets him. He rants about how far they've come, their funding, and how their field of science is looked down upon, and now they have results. The scientist informing him begins to justify the cancellation with the danger that Diana was put in. But Kenneth asks if it hadn't been the professor's own daughter, does this man think that he would have stopped? What if it had been a stranger? The man protests that it's still a human life, but Kenneth smirks, remarking that he wishes the professor had a more pure attitude about science. Elaine and Diana are walking out in the open air, either to or from school, and Diana confesses that she was scared during the experiment, to which Elaine says she knows. It's like your mind is released all at once. It's too much to take. Then, when you try to concentrate on something to stop it, Diana finishes the rest of the thought. It all feeds back on you, and your consciousness is focused into it, and it feels like you're being dragged into hell by the back of your head without any hope. Elaine smiles and suggests that they don't talk about it. Besides, the experiment is going to stop. But Diana continues that when she screamed, something from the deepest pits of her soul, someone was calling out to her, and that someone was about to come over to this side. The next panel is staggeringly effective for establishing the mindset of Diana as she continues. Even now, she can feel that someone is watching her. From somewhere, it's watching them. Elaine successfully lightens the mood by teasing Diana that someone is a boy at school who has a crush on her. Shifting back to the professor, the Tron Dynamics Corporation has come to meet him, and he asks what a weapons manufacturer could possibly want with his company. After all, his company is merely a poorly funded specialized bioengineering research facility. They wouldn't have anything that would interest this corporation. He asks them nicely to leave, but the man who has handed his card to the professor smiles and congratulates him on yesterday's experiment. This alarms the professor, and he asks what the man is talking about. So, the man continues that it would be a waste for the professor to stop his experiments, so the Tron Dynamics Corporation would like to provide support. The professor declines, but the man isn't done, and his request escalates into a threat. He says he would like the professor to accept. While they are still asking, a microwave begins to beep, and one of the man's bodyguards reaches for his gun, but the professor reaches in and grabs his cup of noodles. He requests that they leave, as it is his lunch hour. Also, don't come back. The man chuckles at him, and then requests that, if the professor changes his mind, for him to call him. But the professor gives a harumph and begins to eat his noodles. Fast forwarding to nighttime, a semi-truck pulls up to the facility. A guard outside wonders who it could be at this hour. He tells the driver that he wasn't informed about any deliveries, and the driver smiles as he pulls a gun, saying it doesn't surprise him, and then he shoots the guard. The truck backs into the facility, and the trailer opens to reveal a bunch of people wearing masks with only circular holes for eyes and the mouth. Each mask is designated with a letter and a number, and one of the people snaps their fingers as it is time to move out. The figures move in and begin killing staff before stealing machinery, hand signaling a command for each member to do their part before eventually moving back to the truck with the EX-27 and unloading a bomb. Then the trailer is flown away by an aircraft as the building explodes. At his home, the professor receives a call about the incident and goes to leave, being intercepted by Diana first, who tells him that he's still wearing his nightcap. He tosses it to the side as he opens the door and he's greeted by a massive, hulking figure, flanked on each side by one of the numbered masks from before. As he starts to protest, the figure barges in, and the professor tells Elaine to grab Diana and go to the police. She turns to run and head up a set of stairs, and one of the masks tries to follow her, but she turns and kicks it back down the stairs. She runs to Diana's room and tells her to get up. However, the larger being from before bursts through the floorboards of the room, thrusting Elaine against the ceiling, much to the horror of Diana. And this reveals just how humongous that being truly is. The figure begins to close in on Diana, and she yells. A moment later, all three intruders are leaving, carrying the abducted family away. Then it's more of that straight-line building artwork I love. I assume that we're now at the Tron Dynamics building. The girls are being guarded by some of our masked figures, but inside a large office, the director, the man who threatened the professor, is making his offer. The professor tells him it doesn't matter how many times he asks, the answer is the same. The director tries to appeal to the professor. The fact that he is regarded as a crank and as obscure is a great loss. If he would accept, he would have all the funding he needs. The professor continues to refuse. A shout comes, calling the professor a coward. It's Kenneth with his evil grin. He accepted the offer. The professor asks if he knows what they plan to do with the experiment, to which Kenneth says he does, but he doesn't care. He just wants to continue the research. He calmly says that he used to respect the professor, but then he launches into a tirade about how, regardless of how the professor was perceived, he still strived for truth. But now he's a coward who won't even continue because of his own daughter. The professor retorts angrily that if even the slightest thing goes wrong, it alters the genetic code of mankind. But Kenneth stays with his mindset that the professor wouldn't have said that years ago. He's just gotten old. What good is it to fear? Does he want to cower from fire like primitive man? Kenneth screams that he is no coward, and then grabs a pen from the desk and stabs himself in the hand. This, understandably, shocks the professor. But in his pain, Kenneth continues that he just wants to continue the research. The director pages for the medical team, and Kenneth is taken away. However, the director is not done. He pulls a gun and tells the professor that he is also a scientist. He doesn't want to kill such a brilliant mind, but if his answer is still no, he will without hesitation. Or maybe he'll kill the girls first. Chapter 3. The experiment has resumed. Diana's pulse is rising, and one of the scientists calls for lower intensity, but Kenneth says to maintain. We can see Diana is in visible pain. Kenneth calls for them to raise the intensity again, which is met with protests from one of the scientists, but Kenneth says there is still room for more. The scientist says that they are at the limit. Diana is breathing heavily, sweating, drooling, crying. This machine is torturing her, and a small distance away, Elaine is also experiencing this torment through her psychic link with Diana. Then, Kenneth says it's enough. They pull Diana out of the machine, inject her, and wheel her out on a bed. We now see the professor sitting on a couch at a large table as Kenneth strolls in saying he has the data from today's experiment, and he'd really like to hear the professor's opinions. But the professor only wants to see his daughters, and Kenneth tells him to ask the division manager as he lights a cigarette. He says that he thinks the experiment will be finished soon, and then maybe he can see his daughters. But it would really help if the professor cooperated. Kenneth takes a seat across from the professor and begins explaining that it's incredible the amount that Diana's abilities are progressing, but he's sure her inborn abilities have a lot to do with it. He begins to speak grandiosely about how boundless the development will be for man's abilities and unlocking the gates of evolution. He's asked the division manager for an increase in budget to upgrade the machine and go deeper, but he still wants the professor's help. The professor pleads with him to stop the experiment, but Kenneth coldly replies, "Tell it to the director." Elaine is rushing into Diana's room to see the state she's in, and this justifiably distresses her. She demands the two nurses, who are wearing the masks that we've been seeing, do the experiment on her instead, and they reply they intend to, eventually. But for now, the machine is compatible only with Diana. They would like to build a new machine to experiment on other subjects, But without the cooperation of her father, Diana may die. And Kenneth is so forceful, which leads to some innuendo play between the nurses. Elaine finally loses her composure and strikes one of the nurses, knocking her to the ground. She climbs on top of her and removes the mask to reveal a horrifying sight. The nurse has been repulsively modified as a cyborg. During Elaine's moment of shock, the nurse strikes back, knocking Elaine into a supply cart. She then places her shoe on Elaine's face and slowly descends into madness. Elaine was startled by her face. Well, she'll have an even more horrible face because the nurse is going to rip off her flesh and turn her inside out, then sew her back together. She continues on with her description of what she'll do, but the other nurse walks up behind her and slams her head into the wall. She questions if the demasking released her lock, but then she deactivates the maskless nurse with a switch that is inside her head. She asks Elaine if she's all right, but Elaine asks, "What are they?" as this nurse hauls away the defective one. She says it's better that Elaine not know. Otherwise, she will have endless nightmares. Bloody and bruised, Elaine stares in confusion, but the nurse only says she will be back to tend to her injuries. Alone now, Elaine draws her feet to her chin and begins to cry. But she's not truly alone. Diana rises from the bed and says she is sure their father will do something. They then hug, and our next panel is the director. A deal is being proposed. He asks for some privacy for him and Professor Morgan, and then asks what the professor has to offer. Cyber suits. This catches the director's attention. The suit was the professor's project when he worked for the military, but he abandoned it because of his disgust for weapons development. After that, the progress was slow when the director's company took over, and after 3 years, they canceled the project. The professor explains that there was nothing wrong with the power system or the armor itself. It's just a fancy bulletproof jogging suit. Because it relied on sensing movements from the pilot inside, it was too slow. However, linking directly to the nervous system makes it better. But the director's company stopped at just that. If they improve the brain map and link the professor's new complex to a learning computer, everything can be fed back into the computer to construct a pseudo-consciousness that is aware of both the suit and the pilot. This will eliminate the slow reaction time and reduce idle thoughts interfering with efficiency. Man-machine is not simply a machine that mirrors a human pilot. The cool judgment of machine must be one with the biological genius of man. If the professor uses the EX-type computer, the psychic experiment machine, he can complete it. The director asks if the professor intends to trade the suit for his freedom. After all, if Kenneth's experiment is successful, wouldn't it be possible to make an even better suit? But the professor questions if he really believes that. As the conversation continues, we're shown a woman who exited the office earlier, now observing them from a room above it. The professor goes on. There are still many unknowns, and even if the experiment succeeds, he can't immediately expect to be able to apply it to military hardware. It would be like making a replica of the human brain, and would that even be good for combat purposes? Besides, the unit would be too big for a suit unless he planned to put it on a battleship. He tells the director if he is a businessman, then think about the bottom line. While the director contemplates this, the woman dials on a phone and asks to be connected with the chairman. At the EX-27 machine lab, Kenneth is losing his mind finding out about the deal and asking about his research. The director says not to worry. Kenneth will get funding and be able to continue. He'll give him an answer in 2 weeks. As he leaves, he tells Kenneth he's counting on him, but don't kill the professor's daughter. Knowing he has now stirred the pot, the director chuckles to himself that this will be interesting. There is an abyss, a void, a place of shapes, and a voice is calling to Diana. She recognizes it as the voice of her father and begins to pull herself from a substance in this unknown nexus. The place is a horrifying amalgamation of everything and nothing, and she calls out, asking her father where he is and reaching into space. The voice tells her to be quiet and calm herself. He tells her not to reply, only listen. He accessed the machine the night before and planted this message. He apologizes for how she's being treated and believes it all to be his fault. Outside the machine, the scientists are noticing irregularities in Diana's brainwaves, and inside, she is being informed of a plan to escape. All of them, together. He tells her to listen close as he divulges the plan. But in the lab, Kenneth has come to observe the irregularities, and Diana is smiling and crying. Kenneth instantly calls for them to abort, believing the professor had something to do with this. He storms into the room and demands answers, ripping the helmet off of Diana and yelling at her. One more demand for her to answer, and she blasts him with her telekinesis, rupturing his right eye. In retaliation, he punches her in the face, knocking her out of the chair, and as he is restrained, she smiles at him. It's also to be noted that they have cut her hair short now. She loses consciousness, and Kenneth angrily puts pressure on his eye. At the cybersuit lab, the professor is making jokes and telling stories with his team as they are testing out the cybersuit, and a scientist comes in to deliver the new results on response speed. One of the scientists asks the professor to finish his story, and the end is met with laughter from all. The man testing the suit asks what all the laughter is about, and one of the scientists tells him that he'll tell him quietly during the audio sensor test. They ask this man how the interfacing is, and he says it fits like a glove. The scientists never expected to see the suit working again, and they thank the professor gratuitously for helping the project come back to life. He says not to flatter him, or he might consider world domination. They'll be doing live ammo tests tomorrow. Kenneth is storming towards the lab, and the woman from before takes notice. He demands they open the door, and then he immediately yells for the professor, startling everyone. Still bleeding from his eye and enraged, he demands to know what the professor did to the machine. Chapter 4. The professor takes notice of Kenneth's injury, but Kenneth only yells for him to answer, and the professor answers with a smile that he accessed the machine to work on the cybersuit this past week. Kenneth remarks with some arrogance that the professor is now making weapons to save his own skin. Well, that's fine, but he took his equipment and his personnel to do it, and now he's taking the EX-27. Does he want to interfere that much? Kenneth flies into a rage and begins smashing computers. Scientists rush in to restrain him, but he breaks free and rushes towards the professor. He doesn't get too close, though. The woman from before dives in and scratches his neck. This diverts his path so that he runs into a desk. He grabs his neck, and it's revealed that the woman used a ring with a needle on it to scratch him. Kenneth tries to grab the desk for stability, but collapses to the floor, unconscious. The woman snickers and asks if the professor is hurt, but he says he's fine, thanks to her. She apologizes for her oversight and the inconvenience, but the professor says it was no trouble. But what happened to Kenneth? Well, he's only sleeping. Now the professor asks what happened, referring to why Kenneth was angry to begin with. But she only replies with, "Who knows? Maybe his experiments aren't going well." The professor asks if his daughters are okay, and the woman replies of course, she wouldn't let Kenneth do anything rash, but she would like to see the professor's research completed as soon as possible. And with that, she leaves. The director is in his office, receiving a notice over the intercom about the recent situation. He says to put a tight watch on Kenneth, but leave him alone. As for the professor, keep their eyes on him, and report anything out of the ordinary. And the daughters, keep them as they are, but don't kill them. The director strolls to a large window and says that it looks like it's another peaceful day. In her room, Elaine is sitting on her bed, telepathically communicating with Diana and writing everything down. Her leg is protecting the pad she is writing on from a camera in the corner. Diana has given her the plan. In the cybersuit lab, the man testing it is blasting away the targets with ease during the live ammo test, but the scientists observing say it's aiming a little low. The man piloting is ecstatic, though, and having a great time. But once again, the scientists aren't entirely happy. They are happy enough to revel in the accomplishment and possibilities, praising the professor, but this all seems to land on him hollowly. Now we're shown each of our main characters, Kenneth once again storming down a hallway, Elaine sitting against the wall in her bed, Diana resting as peacefully as she can, and the professor working at a computer while talking to one of his team. Kenneth screams to bring Diana. They are doing another experiment. Whilst a guard is sleeping, A man is sneaking into a lab while wearing a cybersuit helmet. Things are going according to his plan, as no alarms have gone off. He types a few things into a computer, and then removes the helmet to reveal it's the professor. He approaches two cybersuits and chuckles to himself as they step forward on their own. It is then revealed that the cybersuits are equipped with a system that allows them to pilot themselves even if the user is killed. The professor refers to the suits as Stan and Ollie and asks, "Shall we go?" Diana is in turmoil as Kenneth is pushing her deeper into the depths of the machine's experiment. The other scientists are warning him that it's too intense and her body can't take it, but he says to boost her with the drug. Diana is losing it. She can't hold on. Something is coming out of her. She screams for help from her father and Elaine. Elaine can feel this, but she says she can't hear Diana. It becomes too much. The restraints begin to break. Diana shatters the machine, much to the surprise of the scientists, and the room explodes. Alarms blare across the facility, and the other two family members know something is wrong. Diana, still wearing the helmet, stands amongst the rubble as Kenneth struggles to regain his footing. The professor questions if one of the cybersuits has been found. Was it Elaine or Diana? Either way, he must continue with the plan. He prays to himself for his daughters to be safe. The room Elaine is in unlocks, and this alarms her. It's not the planned time, but the unlocked door means that it wasn't her father who was found. It must be Diana. She braces herself to open the door. In the lab, Kenneth is thrust against a wall. Diana approaches him, still wearing the helmet. As he screams for her to hold on, to calm down, she is wordless. She blasts him with her telekinetic energy, and it becomes so intense that it is ripping apart the flesh on his face. She tells him that she was really proud of her hair. Give it back. Give her back her father and Elaine. She screams for him to give them back as she blasts him into the wall with more force. A team of the masked cyborgs rushes in, and Diana turns to confront them. In the process, showing us that Kenneth is very much presumably dead. The cyborgs level their guns at Diana and yell for her to freeze. Chapter 5. Elaine is rushing down a hallway and one of the cyborg nurses notices her all too late. Elaine leaps and plants her knee on the mask of the cyborg before slamming its head into the ground with her hand. She then crashes into the wall behind the cyborg with a thud, but a bowl is dropped behind her. She turns around to see another cyborg standing there. An explosion erupts from the building. This awakes the director, who instantly asks through the intercom what it was. A voice on the other end informs him that there's a fire in Kenneth's lab, and the guards are in a gun battle against someone on the 62nd floor. The director questions if it would be the professor, and we see the cyborgs are facing one of the cybersuits. The bodyguard woman from before says that the battle upstairs is a diversion, and the director concludes that the professor is trying to escape, but the woman says that the commotion in Kenneth's lab does not make sense. In the lab, the cyborgs are screaming as Diana stands over them. They are all pressed into a pile, and as they cry for help, they begin to compress further and further, their bones cracking and blood spurting from their bodies. Diana finally removes the helmet using her powers, and she is overwhelmed by the sight of the carnage she has caused. She screams. Elaine senses this and calls out to her, but Diana says she's fine and she will be there soon. Elaine has dispatched the other cyborg, and she takes its gun. She chambers around, and alarms continue to sound throughout the facility. Calls over the PA to arrest the professor and his daughters are made. Make sure not to kill them. Somewhere in the facility, one of the cybersuits is firing on the cyborgs and the bodyguard woman. The cyborgs plan to use a missile launcher, but the woman calls them idiots and tells them to go after the professor while she handles the cybersuit. One tries to follow her around the corner, telling her to come back, but its head is obliterated as she continues forward. Another tries to peek the corner and fire, but it is also destroyed. The cybersuit speaks in barcode as the woman approaches. They face off, and she remains confident, continuing forward. It doesn't attack. She casually strides up to it and concludes that as long as she doesn't have a weapon and doesn't attack, it won't attack either. She snarkily remarks that The professor is such a humanitarian. Elaine takes out another cyborg, this time with the gun she picked up, but more are coming, so she ducks around a corner while delivering another shot for covering fire before running away. She runs and runs until she encounters another cyborg. She fires but misses this time, and now she has a failure to eject stovepipe jam. She braces for her impending doom. A shot is fired, but not at her. The cyborg falls on top of her, and her father greets her, asking what she's screaming about. He is escorted by one of the cybersuits, and she rushes to his arms. Her relief is short, though, as she asks where Diana is. The professor looks down and informs her that he wasn't there in time. An accident happened in Kenneth's lab. He says his plan wasn't good enough. Either way, it's not safe. She needs to go on ahead. The cybersuit and he will look for Diana. She refuses and says she wants to come along, but a voice rings out saying, "There's no need for that. Diana is right here." It's the director. He says he never would have suspected such action from the professor. Looks like the deal is off. The professor responds that since the ruckus upstairs has died down, they must have captured the other suit, so he's leaving. The director smiles and says that it seems like the professor never trusted him, and the professor replies that he tends not to trust men with big noses and women with large breasts. This gives us quite a funny expression from Elaine behind him. "That's prejudiced," says the director, and he snaps his fingers. One of the large cyborgs steps forward carrying an unconscious Diana. Suddenly, the professor turns serious, calling the director by name, Garnes, demanding to know what he has done to his daughter. He smiles and says he rescued her unconscious body from the smoke. While this conversation is happening, Diana communicates telepathically with Elaine. She apologizes and says she can't move. She tells her to run. Diana then telepathically instructs the suit to take Elaine and escape. Elaine pleads with her not to do this, but Diana says she wants her to get away. As the director is wrapping up his conversation, he asks the professor and Elaine to come to him. But the cyborg holding Diana begins to glitch and malfunction. It is violently torn apart, causing a momentary distraction. The cybersuit grabs hold of Elaine, and the director yells not to let them escape. But the suit is utilizing jet thrusters, and it begins to fly away as the professor screams for his daughter. This all happens in an instant, and as Diana falls from the arms of the large cyborg she just destroyed, she sends out more of her power, crippling and destroying the others as they try to shoot the cybersuit. It swerves, dodges, and launches itself high above the cyborgs, the director, and Diana. As the distance grows further, Elaine screams for Diana, and Diana weakly replies. Elaine pleads with the cybersuit for it to go back, let go, anything but leave Diana behind. But it continues, and it bursts through a window to the outside world. And as it flies away, Elaine stares over its shoulder at the building containing her family that is left behind. End of part 1. But this is really sad for me, because there isn't a part 2. Yeah, the writing in the prologue starts out a little cheesy, but the quality of the writing grows very quickly. The anime kind of serves as a part 2, but the writing is so different, and from the very beginning, it feels like it's forgotten the roots of the story. It really needs to be taken as its own thing to be appreciated. I want to tell you a lot about it, but I think I'll let it speak for itself as we go through it. The dub and the sub have some very large differences, at least in the first part. So for the sake of the original context, I will be covering the story as it's shown in the subtitles. The dub isn't terrible, except for episodes 4 and 5. The voice acting is absolutely something to behold, and I would have included some snippets, but this is going to be long enough as it is. So, let's go. We open to Kenneth and Professor Morgan starting up a camera to record a noticeably younger and larger Professor Morgan, explaining the concept of the Vajra and the Mind Shadow. The Vajra being a life force, and the Mind Shadow being something that can tap into it. With the use of a machine called the Mandala, he aims to amplify the Mind Shadow. As the camera zooms out to show the finished product, Professor Morgan introduces the Mandala, a large pair of robotic hands surrounding a chamber of some sort. They are strapping the professor's wife Tanya into the machine, and Professor Morgan is once again shown delivering a monologue about the Vajra power increasing, and as he does, it will give birth to his child, Genocyber. After the title sequence, we are told that this is Hong Kong in the early 21st century. Also, a young male child is being chastised by an older boy, the ringleader of a gang, about the fact that they worked to get rid of counterfeit money, and the kid, who is part of their group, ended up taking the counterfeit money as payment, which made this boy mad. He proceeds to beat the crap out of this kid, and afterwards, the older boy and his friends walk away saying they are going to go find some tail. As the boy lays unconscious in the sun, he sees visions of a girl, and when he wakes up, he sees a dead body. But standing over that dead body is a young blonde girl. There's a TV program talking about wars, corporations, and aspirations of a weapon-free world. And this transitions into the police finding the dead body from earlier. This man was a professor from the Kuryu group. A child is using his psychic abilities to determine what is on a paper enclosed in a scientist's hand. Observing this through a monitor is an old man resembling Dr. Wily from Mega Man. Dr. Wily receives a phone call, and it's his receptionist telling him there's a police officer named Davy here to see him. He tells her to show him up to his room. In another part of the building, a man screams and falls out of a door, trying to crawl away. A smiling young girl emerges, and she is approached by a woman with short brown hair. The girl holds a tennis ball and begins to make it levitate and circle her hand. She continues to grin, but the woman takes control of the ball and makes the girl hallucinate that it is filled with flesh and teeth. The woman walks past, and the girl faints. Dr. Wily, now in his office with the police officer, is having a conversation that we seem to pick up midway. He says there's no point in looking at the past in this city, and it was 13 years ago. The policeman corrects him and says that it's been 14 years since the Morgan Institute incident. Dr. Wily says it was an accident, not an incident. He was young and not as careful. Safety was not as it is. And, regrettably, they lost Dr. Morgan. The policeman's next line reveals that this is Kenneth. He says that if he finds out Kenneth has resumed Morgan's research, he will shut him down. At that moment, the woman from earlier walks in, and the policeman is bombarded with images of his own corpse hanging and dismembered. Kenneth slaps her to make her stop. This is Diana. Diana glares at the policeman, and Kenneth tells him to leave. After the policeman is left, we find that Diana calls Kenneth father. She asks about an object he was holding, a restraint collar, which restricted the powers of Elaine. It's dangerous for her not to have it, and Kenneth remarks that, with her gone, it deeply impacts his research. Where is Elaine? Well, she's the blonde girl from earlier, and they made her feral. She's actually feral in this movie. Kenneth and Diana continue their conversation. Kenneth needs to find Elaine. If she ends up exposing the Institute, it will be shut down. Diana is now on a large slab, which connects with wires to all of her body. Everything from the head down is cyborg with a metal exoskeleton. Diana begins to protest about Elaine, but Kenneth reaches inside her abdomen and begins to torture her from the inside while yelling that he saved her and now she is turning against him. We're now introduced to 3 new characters at a restaurant. These are mercenaries discussing Elaine. She is their target. They're aware that she is a powerful Esper, and their instructions are to bring her back to Tokyo alive, even if she is missing a few parts. Elaine is being haunted by visions of her sister and Genocyber. This startles her awake. She is in a dingy room lit by sunlight, and outside the door, a grocery bag is dropped, causing a fruit to roll towards her. She jumps to a crouch, inspects the fruit, and howls before sniffing it. I mean it, she's feral and nonverbal. It turns out it's the boy from earlier who dropped the bag, and he begins picking things up. They shift up to the roof of the building, and Elaine demonstrates her power by levitating the fruit, peeling it, then launching slices of it into the boy's mouth with a smile. Diana is in a large machine watching telepathically from a distance. She tells Kenneth that Elaine is very peaceful. She hasn't seen her this stable since she escaped, and Kenneth says that means it's their best opportunity to retrieve her. Diana asks if she's only there to control Elaine, and Kenneth confirms that that's the case, and he does so rather coldly. Diana protests that Elaine is dangerous and doesn't know how to control her powers. Kenneth has a machine inject her with something, and he states that he needs both of them, and she needs to learn this. We get a robot suit-up sequence for Diana, and a truck drives off containing her. Elsewhere, there are men watching a video of an outtake from a TV drama. Elaine drops into frame from above, and a man, our corpse from earlier, rushes in and nervously covers her, but the men watching the tape recognize her. During their conversation, an earthquake hits, and it is purely inconsequential to the story. We're shown a television broadcast going out that says Elaine was kidnapped. That, however, is important. Next, we see the older boys from earlier getting some money from a Yakuza, presumably for fencing some items. He asked what happened to the younger boy who was with them, and the ringleader says he got rid of him because he was too much trouble. He's probably crying about it right now. But the Yakuza says he doubts it because he saw him with a cute older girl earlier. This leads them to show up at the boy's apartment. They make some rude comments at Elaine, humiliate, abuse, and beat up the boy. And while Elaine is frozen because she is now telepathically connected to Diana, who is honing in on her position, the ringleader begins to molest her. This doesn't last long. She screams as Diana crashes through the roof and quickly shoves the claw of her suit through the ringleader's head. Down in the street, Kenneth and team are monitoring the events from a truck as Diana pleads with Elaine for her to restrain herself and come back with her. But Elaine angers, and in a flash of energy, she disappears. Diana tells us that Elaine slipped into another dimension. She and the boy materialize on a subway platform. Elaine clearly overexerted herself. She is breathing heavily and sweating. The boy tries to comfort her, and soon they are on the subway train, with the boy anxiously guarding her unconscious body. But we hear some radio chatter that someone has spotted them. The earlier broadcast about Elaine being kidnapped seems to have put some eyes on the ground, and witnesses have called in. One of the mercenaries from the restaurant is listening in on this radio chatter from a robot ear. Turns out he's a cyborg. He starts stamping his feet, which allows him to drill into the ground, and he appears in front of the train. Using a large set of robotic arms and legs protruding from his back, he grabs the front of the train and brings it to a stop. The forces of this toss the young boy and knock him unconscious. The trio make their way into the train and take Elaine. But not all is well. The short fat one begins freaking out. There are bugs in his brain, or so he thinks. He begins clawing at his scalp until finally ripping open the metal casing which houses his brain and digs his fingers into it, and it causes him to eventually drop dead. Of the remaining pair, the woman also sees the bugs. She fights it, but turns around to see Elaine standing there, glaring at her. There's an explosion, and the remaining two mercenaries begin to run, taking the young boy with them. As we are shown the aftermath of the incident on the train, police, body bags, Elaine being rushed to the hospital, we have a conversation once again between Diana and Kenneth. She asks why he is protecting Elaine, but he says that he's protecting Diana from her. Elaine is too strong. She asks what is she to do, and he replies that he wants her to enter Elaine's mind and control her powers from there. She's reluctant, but she agrees. It's begun to rain, and a female nurse and a man sit outside Elaine's hospital room. The nurse complains about Elaine being weird, but can't articulate why. Inside the room, the policeman from the beginning stands over Elaine's bed, observing her laying there unconscious. He begins reflecting on the case to himself. 14 years ago, Dr. Morgan was researching a new superweapon that could upset the balance of power in the world. However, there was an explosion that killed him and his wife. 5 years later, Kenneth became the head of the Kiryu group. The policeman shifts further into his memory to when he was meeting with an informant. The informant hands him a picture and tells him that Tanya didn't die in the explosion. She survived and gave birth to a little girl, the daughter of Dr. Morgan. The policeman recalls that a month later, the informant died of an unexpected heart attack, and all of the informant's files on the investigation were stolen. Back to the present, the nurse is dead. The policeman is running. Blood and body parts are everywhere. He turns a corner and is greeted by a multitude of figures wearing masks very similar to the ones from the manga, except they also have scalpels and doctor coats. He turns to look behind him but now they have surrounded him, and they are accompanied by Kenneth. The policeman is knocked out, and when he wakes up, to his horror, his wrists and ankles have been tied to a hospital bed, and his torso has been peeled open to expose his insides. Back in Elaine's room, Diana, clad in her robotic armor, stands over her. She enters Elaine's mind and asks her to come back. They belong at the Institute with their father, but she refuses. She tells Diana that that's not their father, and she's not going back. If Diana goes back, she'll die. Diana's temperament shifts. She says she's tired of Elaine. She calls her a little monster, and she tells her that she hates her. She begins choking Elaine's unconscious body in the real world. Elaine wakes up, and the entire floor of the hospital they are on explodes, and they go to the roof of the building for a fight. Elaine screams, and with her powers she rips electrical cables from the roof beneath her feet. She begins whipping them at Diana, but Diana avoids them with a flying leap, and then plunges down at Elaine, who easily dodges and teleports away. Diana's armor launches rockets from her wrists, and this causes the roof below Elaine to collapse. She falls into a hole and is caught by electrical cables. Diana stands over the hole and launches her arms, which are attached to cables. She grabs Elaine by the shoulders, her metal fingertips puncturing the flesh, and she lifts her back up to eye level. But the cloth Elaine is wearing drops to the ground, and then her powers cause it to wrap around Diana's upper body. Elaine summons the electrical cables once more. They hoist Diana up and begin overwhelming her with electrical current. She rips off one of Diana's legs, shatters her faceplate, and then Diana screams that she doesn't want to die. She begs Elaine to stop. And Elaine does. She lets Diana down gently, and the cables release her. But at this moment, a flying vehicle appears behind her and turns on its lights. It's the mercenaries, and they have the boy with them, who they threaten to kill if she doesn't come with them. Elaine stands there and screams, but while her back is turned, Diana launches one of her arms and impales Elaine from behind. Elaine makes eye contact with the boy and smiles at him. The boy smiles back, but Diana is snickering from behind while watching Elaine bleed out. Elaine begins to glow, and she unleashes her power in a giant burst of yellow light, which destroys much of Diana's armor. She then disintegrates, and it looks like part of her essence rained down on Diana. Kenneth is calling for the masked beings to grab Diana and get her to the mandala, but all too late. The mercenaries are killing the masks, and there is a very, very large pile of the ones they have already killed. They tell him to comply, and soon they are back at the lab, and Diana is hooked up again. The mercs are from corporate, and corporate is interested in the research that seems to have been hidden. So, they are taking Elaine. He explains that Elaine is dead, but they say they couldn't find her body, and he needs to talk. He explains that Diana was sent to get Elaine, because Diana could control her, but in her madness she tried to kill Elaine, and Elaine released her power and transformed into something else. Elaine has always been far more powerful. It's the reason that Diana was born with non-functioning limbs, and also Elaine, a wild animal. Elaine has multiple mind shadows, and Diana sensed this first by entering Elaine's mind. The female mercenary tells him to stop, but he continues. After that, Diana began to control Elaine, but Elaine discovered what it meant to live. Kenneth built a second mandala to combine their powers, and that was what he intended to do, but he can't now. The mercs aren't happy with this answer, so they're taking him and Diana with them to Tokyo, because it doesn't matter anymore. Kenneth has a meltdown about the situation and blames everything on Diana, and inside Diana, we are shown that she is trapped and being bombarded with visions from Elaine, their father and mother discussing the pregnancy, Kenneth revealing that he involved the Curio group, and then killing Dr. Morgan, then their birth. And somehow this makes Diana realize that she only exists to be part of Elaine. She pleads for Elaine to let her keep her body. Kenneth gave her this body, but Elaine shows her the young boy. She wants revenge. Diana pleads more, but Elaine is going to have her way. On the outside world, Kenneth and Diana are being transported in a truck. Diana's body wakes up, and she begins to glow brightly. Rising from the box, Genocyber is born. The truck explodes, killing Kenneth and sending shockwaves of power down the streets, causing even larger explosions. A plane circles overhead and is refused permission to land for the time being. Down on the ground, the mercenaries are on fire. Their clothes and skin burn away, leaving them in a new form that resembles the paradigms from the manga. Genocyber climbs from the wreckage and stands over the mercs, emitting such immense power that they are unable to move. This new being, Genocyber, sprouts wings and flies away. The paradigm mercs begin to transform into hideous new forms, and as Genocyber flies through the city, it causes explosions and mass destruction. The transformed mercenaries delight in the possibility of killing this new monster, and they fly into the sky to pursue it. The once female mercenary sprouts a minigun from her mouth and begins firing, but Genocyber grabs the back of her head and begins to tear her apart in a shower of fluids before eventually ripping her completely in half. The once male mercenary decides to charge Genocyber, but he is grabbed and slammed into the front of the circling plane, causing both he and the plane to explode. Then, the night is finished, and as morning comes, the city is calm. Genocyber sits on an I-beam of an uncompleted skyscraper frame. The young boy calls out to Elaine, and she transforms into herself once more as his translucent form floats down to her. She reaches out to him and begins to cry, but he says he can't play anymore, though he really liked it. It was the most fun he had in his life. He loves her, but he has to go. He says goodbye and flies away. Elaine cries and blood splatters her face. We're shown that she never really transformed back, and the cell pans up to show the boy's body on another beam above her. In her sadness and rage, Elaine, as Genocyber, initiates an extremely powerful explosion. It begins with the building she's on, but then it continues to grow, and it grows into an explosion that resembles a rising phoenix, and then it destroys all of Hong Kong. Elaine, now possessing Diana's robotic body, but with her own face, walks down a beach, and as the shot pans out, it shows that it may not be a normal beach. There's something that looks like an aground cargo ship behind her. Diana's voice calls out to Elaine, and the credits roll to the ending theme, Fairy Dreaming. Episode 2. We open to 3 attack helicopters racing across the ocean. As they get to land, we see Elaine running with 3 children on the sand away from the helicopters. The helicopters open fire, and each child is killed in a gruesome fashion. This obviously triggers Elaine to transform into Genocyber, and she kills the first helicopter pilot by shoving her hand through the cockpit window into his skull. The second helicopter tries to escape, but Genocyber catches up to it easily and destroys it by flying through it from below. The last helicopter stands off with Genocyber and tries firing bullets, but the creature blocks them all, and Genocyber charges up as we hit the title screen. At the Kiryu building, a very young boy takes a seat at a large conference room. This is the chairman. A video conference begins with the United States government, and we are informed that the area we saw earlier is the nation of Korean. They have withdrawn from the United Nations and begun attacking their neighbors. The men on the other side of the screen are asking for assistance in dealing with Korean. Their helicopters were the ones that were there, and they have photographs of Genocyber, but they don't know what it is yet. They just think it's a super weapon. The US are sending an aircraft carrier to Korean. They would like help for the carrier, and the chairman agrees. On the aircraft carrier, the Alexandria, Kiryu cargo is being unloaded, and inside one of these boxes is a new Vajra project, the Vajranoid. We will learn more about this later. At the same time, some pilots are taking off in jets. While doing a routine flight, one begins to see dead children in his cockpit. They grab the center stick and nose the craft down as the pilot screams. The next day, an experiment/demonstration of the Vajranoid is being held by one of the Kiryu scientists, Sakamitsu. They load it into the cockpit of one of the jets, and it extends fleshy strands from its body, which attach to various places in the cockpit and begin working into the electronics and machinery. It is interfacing with the vehicle, and it can interface with almost any piece of equipment in this manner. The jet takes off and begins to ascend directly upwards into the sky. As this is happening, The Vajranoid pilot begins to get flashes of an incoming propeller plane. The plane is calling the Alexandria for assistance and a place to land. It has a wounded passenger, and that passenger is Elaine. The Vajranoid does not like this and begins to nose down directly towards the prop plane. Just before it strikes, it pulls up and then speeds along the deck of the Alexandria directly towards the bridge, but it pulls up at the last moment, and the prop plane makes a less than graceful landing. The scientist is humiliated, and while the Vajranoid is in containment, he begins to berate the creature, but the creature hacks the computer behind him to tell him a foreign body is on the ship and it must be eliminated. The Vajranoid is, of course, talking about Elaine. Elaine is currently in the mess hall and is once again fully feral. She does not know how to use a fork and knife, but a blonde lady, the ship's doctor named Myra, is looking after her. Down the table from her and Myra, a few seamen are giggling while watching her struggle and making fun of her cyborg body. Myra throws a pepper shaker, and Elaine makes it explode above the men. As they scurry off, she uses telepathy to tell Myra that the children she played with are all dead. And Myra freaks out because, well, telepathy. She continues that all her friends are dead and more will die. But Myra tells her that everything is okay and she will protect her. Elaine looks up at the ceiling and sees the dead children. She smiles at them. While Sakamitsu is asleep, the dead children appear on his computer screen. He is shown a vision in his dreams of Genocyber back in Hong Kong and the death and destruction she caused. He wakes up and turns off his now static computer monitor and sees the dead children behind him in the reflection. Elaine is now dressed up in a sailor's uniform, with her hair now in twin tails. Also, she runs around with this thing that is not a scooter. It has handlebars, it has a stick, and it has a single wheel. I have no clue what this is. But anyways, she passes by some Navy officers who call her Laura, and it's revealed that Myra is telling people that Elaine, now Laura, is a telepath, but they think that it's her imagination because she only talks to Myra. Myra lost her daughter in a plane crash, and she looked to be about the same age, which doesn't really make sense, since Diana was pretty obviously in her 20s, and Elaine is supposed to be her twin. Myra is looking at a photo of her actual daughter and concludes that she needs to find Elaine because she needs her medication. Elaine is pushing her wheel stick further into the bowels of the ship, and she sees the children again. They are beckoning her to follow. Myra is looking for her, and she runs into the ship's chaplain, who tells her where he last saw her headed. Elaine is led to the chamber of the Vajranoid by the children. She plays around in the chamber for a moment, and the Vajranoid senses her presence. Suddenly, she gets flashbacks of what happened to the children, and they change into their corpse forms. The Vajranoid begins to power up. Elaine and it lock eyes. The scientist on duty wakes up to see what's happening as glass breaks, and the Vajranoid grabs and kills him. Up on the bridge, the captain has been scolding Sakamitsu about the experiment when they get an alert that something is happening in the lab, and they aren't receiving a response. Alarms begin to sound all over the ship, and electricity crackles from the computer consoles. The battle between the Vajranoid and Genocyber has begun. They lock hands and face off. Episode 3. Myra is pounding on the door of the Vajranoid's chamber, demanding to be let in. She knows Elaine is in there. As men come to restrain her, the door is hit from the inside and begins to deform. Inside, the fight is raging on, and Genocyber has been thrust into a wall. The Vajranoid grabs her by the neck, lifts her, and tosses her again. It teleports to where Genocyber landed, and summons the flesh connectors which attach to Genocyber's arm. It begins to infect her, and she punctures her arm with her own claws to keep the infection from spreading. Some men have crawled up into the ventilation shaft and are using a welding torch to cut through the roof, but they shouldn't do that. Genocyber rips her arm off and thrusts it into the ventilation shaft. She begins to power up and emits telekinetic waves, which disrupt the Vajranoid and cause it so much pain that it grabs its skull. This also affects the men in the ventilation shaft, and their heads explode. Genocyber's remaining arm begins to glow, and she uppercuts the head off of the Vajranoid, shattering it in the process before she destroys the torso as well. When it's all over, Elaine is lying on the ground, unconscious, and the ship's crew finally make it into the room and observe the aftermath and carnage. The captain is abhorred at the remains of the Vajranoid and lambasts Sakamitsu for answers. In the ventilation shafts, however, the infected arm of Genocyber is crawling along. Myra and Elaine are in the ship's chapel when Sakamitsu comes in. He is convinced that Elaine is responsible for everything that has happened. Myra tries to tell him that she had nothing to do with it, but he demands answers and begins shaking Elaine. The chaplain steps in and hauls him away, and he raves about Elaine as he is drug out the door. On the bridge, one of the officers is telling the captain that they should abort. Everything has gone wrong and it's a bad omen. But the captain responds that since there has been a move for global disarmament, this ship was made to be a mobile base, and ships like it are now on the front line for every battle. Down in Sakamitsu's room, he is in a slump. However, the dismembered hand drops out of the air vent and startles him. He stares at it in horror until it begins to glow, and it writes, "Help me," on the floor. He concludes that it tapped into Vajra energy from another plane, and that has allowed it to survive with a mind shadow inside of the arm. He questions what the arm is, though, and where it came from. Later, he reveals to the other scientists that the Vajranoid is still alive. They ask for proof, and he says that the proof came to him. They ask for more answers, and he says that the Vajranoid told him of an enemy on the ship. The enemy is what caused the battle earlier, and it's still here and alive. Well, they want to see it, and he says he will show it to them, but they must commit fully. He must know that they are on his side. He plans to engage the Vajranoid in a battle scenario to demonstrate its full power. One by one, the other men agree. The sounds of children laughing echo through the room as he tells them the plans to rebuild the Vajranoid. And he will do it using the first piece. He sets a bundle on the table which contains the arm, and the ghost children appear behind the men. Outside, a storm is brewing, and inside the scientists gather around the arm while it's being charged with energy. Sakamitsu is walking down the hall, and as he passes by the chaplain, he tells him that he found God, and God answered his question. The chaplain tells him to come to the chapel and confess his sins, but the scientist keeps on walking as the children appear around the priest. Down in the nuclear reactor room of the ship, engineers are taking readings when a few drops of red liquid fall from a hole in the ceiling above onto a clipboard. The man holding the clipboard looks up, but soon he begins to scream. His eyes rupture from their sockets, and he is impaled at multiple points of his body. He is lifted up, and it is revealed that the dismembered arm has become a large creature. Elaine detects this, and is plagued by visions of the men in the control room being eviscerated. She sees the creature go into the core of the ship and begin to integrate with it as well. The electronics become alive and take on a mind of their own. The Vajranoid is integrating with the entire ship. To the horror of the priest, it takes over the chapel. To the horror of the captain, it's taking over the bridge and one of his men. It's integrating and absorbing the crew all over the ship. Not quite death, but not an undeath of individuality. All will become one with the ship. Every piece of machinery and every person, every surface, fully taken over, and only Sakamitsu remains. Elaine is shown guarding herself and the sleeping body of Myra from the ship's new tendrils which have crawled out of everywhere, and she's using a force field to do it. In Myra's restless nightmare, we are shown that Genocyber's fight from the first episode is responsible for the death of her daughter. The plane that was destroyed was the one her daughter was on. The nightmare awakes Myra, and she observes the state of the ship and begins to puke. She sees, however, that Elaine is sleeping peacefully, much to her relief. We cut to the two of them running down a hallway, and eventually they make it to the upper deck. It's been completely taken over by the red substance of the Vajranoid, and Sakamitsu is looking like, while he's been left alive, he's no longer fully himself. He raves about his greatest creation, and that everyone on the ship is still alive. They're just part of it. He invites them to join him, and Myra slams a fire axe into his skull. He writhes, and an eldritch monster made of his brain and intestines emerges from his mouth. It flies at her and Elaine, but Elaine quickly destroys it with just a look. She then screams, and the scientist explodes. Myra is broken. She begins to rave about how she and Elaine have killed it, and she shakes Elaine, telling her in a manic state that she must destroy all the monsters on the ship. But the ship begins to transform. The final breaking point for Myra is when Elaine tells her that she won't die, and then Elaine's face splits open and she transforms into Genocyber. Myra can do nothing but scream now. Genocyber takes flight and dashes through the bridge down towards the center of the ship, emerging into the nuclear reactor room to reveal just how immense this monster has become. Tendrils wrap around Genocyber's arms and legs and begin to pull her towards a monstrous mouth, but she begins to glow, and faces of the crew embedded within the walls begin to scream and explode, and finally the entire ship explodes. Myra is in a helicopter being flown away from the wreckage, and as the helicopter approaches land, a bright red flash covers everything. To the dismay of the pilots, their entire city is burning, and in the smoke is Genocyber. Myra begins to rant that Genocyber is an angel, and she's come back. She begs Elaine to take her away, and the theme, Fairy Dreaming, plays as we fade into credits. Episode 4. These are the end times. The battle rages on. Mechs step through a destroyed city at night, scanning for a target. They spot Genocyber and begin firing. An orbital satellite laser strike destroys more of this already broken city. Armed aircraft head deeper into the city, and inside the explosion they see Genocyber. A horn is missing from her head. She's being observed from a room elsewhere filled with televisions, and in this room we hear reports of all the locations worldwide that have been destroyed by Genocyber. Inside the room, an old man sits in a high-backed chair. He questions how it's possible. They have been fighting Genocyber for 100 years. It is inevitable that the battle will only end in humanity's destruction. What is it? Where did it come from? Who brought forth such a creature? He will fight and create an opponent who will hunt Genocyber forever. He stands and is alerted that the target is approaching. Then the room explodes. A gargantuan explosion is seen from space, and high above Earth, a satellite with a red dragon emblem. In a darkened room, a computer monitor is counting up, and it rolls over to the year 2400. A train races towards a giant walled city. This is the city Grand des Arcs. The train pulls into the station and is instantly greeted by a pre-recorded voice on the intercom welcoming the travelers and informing them to have their papers ready. Off the train steps a man and a blind girl, Ryu and Mel. They are instantly accosted by a security officer who believes that they are sneaking off. But upon discovery that the girl is blind, the security instructs them to move along. He doesn't have time for them. We have more pre-recorded messages demanding workers increase productivity and warning them that their work permit can be revoked. A man is shot in the head, to the horror of two others. The man who shot him says that he warned him not to put the city in danger. He then promotes one of the two bystanders to head of public safety office, a man named Radnick. We can assume that the man he just shot is the former holder of this position, and the man who shot him, the mayor. He continues that the new head is to find and quash the rebels of the city as they can bring it down, comparing them to ants and demanding that he smash them. Seemingly taking this to heart, soon after, a rebel base is breached by the police and the inhabitants arrested. And then after this, they are tied to posts and executed via firing squad. The mayor is overlaid over the following scenes, yelling about grinding down the vermin. But this transitions to a street preacher in robes telling the crowd that human beings are not insects. We are all children of God. We must not forget that mankind incurred God's wrath and he destroyed the world. A child is passing out flyers as the man continues to speak about class struggles, bloodshed, and God's wrath coming back to destroy the city. Only those who are righteous will be saved and can rebuild. A quick flashback of our couple from earlier when they were outside the city. They are here because a doctor told them that he could not cure the woman's condition, but it was possible that a doctor at Grand des Arcs could. Next, we find out what the couple do for money. Ryu is a knife thrower who throws blindfolded, and Mel performs acts with her extra senses, determining dice that she cannot see, and identifying people by objects that are close to their heart. They don't like it here, though. They're only here for the money, and it seems that a doctor here will not be able to help them, so they will be moving on. The mayor of the city is congratulating Radnek on eliminating the rebels. He is pleased with his work. However, there is a new threat, the religious group known as the Agents of God. These are the disciples of the street preacher from earlier. They have built a church in the lower levels and are taking care of the poorest children. The mayor doesn't like them. He believes their ideas are dangerous and they're insects to him, parasites upon his city. He wants them eliminated. Ryu is walking through the street as we hear more pre-recorded messages, this time about reporting any observed crimes. He's spotted by a man in a top hat, and the man offers him a large, unnamed sum of money. He leads him up a flight of stairs to a room with a guard outside, and as the door opens, Ryu is stunned. Heading down a stairwell underground, a small child is asking the priest why God burned the earth, and the priest explains that humans forgot the existence of God. The child replies that God must be lonely, but the priest tells him no. It is simply that God is angered when the devil is led into the hearts of man. When the devil returns to earth, God sleeps here waiting to be reborn. The God he refers to is Genocyber, resting in an arched cutout in the walls. In a sewer, Ryu is running. He face plants into the water, and as he pulls himself up, he recalls the recent events. The room he was led to was a private party. Guests are wearing masks, and a boxing match with spiked gloves is taking place in a cage. It's Ryu's turn now. They want him to put on his show of knives. However, they give him a new target, and he questions what was done to the target. The scene shifts back and forth. He barges into the room of he and the blind girl, telling her that they have to leave, that he has killed a man. And now we are shown that. He throws his knives, and they land in the abdomen of a man who has been strapped to his target wall. He takes off his blindfold, and a large man is waiting for him with a baton. The man begins to strangle the knife thrower, but he grabs a knife from the plate and stabs him in the hand to run. He concludes that they did this to him because he's a foreigner. Ryu and Mel run down an alleyway, and startled by approaching footsteps, they head into a manhole cover. They were spotted by a homeless man. The word has spread fast, and he's already reporting them to Radnek. They've headed down into the ruins, but Radnek says let them go. They'll never make it out of the ruins alive. Ruins is the right word. Ryu and Mel have emerged into a crumbling city. The ground is soft though, and as they walk, the mud begins to move. Soon a couple of leaping leeches land on Ryu's shoulder. He pulls one off, and upon seeing what it is, he begins to run while carrying Mel. The leeches pursue, but it doesn't take long for them to escape, and onto more seemingly solid ground. Mel asks what is near them, and Ryu tells her that they're in a charnel pit, or a place for skeletal remains. She says she can feel it, the horrible things that happened. Soon she hears voices calling to her, telling her to go a specific direction. It's coming from below, and as she places her ear to the ground, they fall through it into the chamber of Genocyber, and the fall knocks them unconscious. While in this state, Mel is plagued by visions of Genocyber's last great battle, aircraft and their lasers blasting the beast, only to have the fire returned on them with an even larger beam that wipes them out in a single wave. Genocyber easily destroys all around her with a single blast, no matter the enemy. But then, Diana calls out to Elaine inside. She tells her this must end, and her spirit floats down to her. They take each other's hand and drift off into the mandala in some other plane. Genocyber, the body, plummets to Earth. Episode 5. In the world where the mandala is, Mel wanders around with Diana, while in our world, the priest is giving the story of the creation myth. Diana shows Mel Elaine's glowing form, resting, floating above them in the fetal position, and as Elaine fades away, it reveals a stone form of Genocyber. Diana screams at this sight, and Mel wakes up. She's in a bed surrounded by children. She introduces herself and asks their names. But they all start to speak at once, and we are only introduced to the child closest to her, Rocco. He feeds her some soup, and we jump ahead in time to Rocco taking Mel to the church as he was instructed to do when she woke up. As she enters the church, the priest is deep in his sermon, but he breaks to greet her. This jumps to another scene in the chamber of Genocyber, where the priest tells Mel that she is a messenger from God. In the end times, God sends a messenger as a warning. Her falling into Genocyber's chamber is proof. He asks for what God's words were, and she tells him that if that thing is God, then he is terrifying. The priest despairs, and Mel says she doesn't understand. He says it may already be too late. Mel doesn't have time for this, though. She asks where Ryu is, but the priest says they found her alone. Ryu is wandering around in a daze on the city streets above when a car explodes. The citizens are lined up against a wall and wait for inspection, as one man takes off running. He bumps into Ryu, dropping something into his pocket. The man continues to run, and then is gunned down. An officer offers his hand to Ryu, and he begins to freak out, remembering that Mel is down in the lower sectors. Unfortunately, the police recognize Ryu, and he is brought in. During the interrogation, they find what was planted in his pocket, a detonator, so now they are convinced that he is with the rebels. Mel is wandering around inside the mandala world again, and Diana has reverted to a childlike mindset. She can shift size and perspective at will, but Mel is concerned about Ryu, and Diana takes this as her not wanting to play with her. She calls Mel Big Sister. Back with Ryu, the man in the top hat enters the interrogation room and begins to slap him around. As with everyone else now, he's convinced that Ryu was always an agent for the rebels, and he proceeds to inject him with something. Ryu begins to remember. He woke up before Mel, and she was glowing on the ground when Diana appeared and led him out and back to the surface in a fugue state. This seems to have given the man in the top hat the information he wanted. He gives this information to Radnek, and they are going to eliminate the church as they are now convinced that it is the rebel base. And Radnek instructs the top hat man not to tell the mayor. Then they prepare the police for a raid. Down in the underground town of the church, Mel and Rocco are sitting in a bed of flowers. She starts to remark about how these flowers were all over her hometown, but she begins to cry, and then she throws up. Rocco runs for help, and when the priest comes, she tells him to get out and leave her alone, and she continues to cry. She eventually screams for Ryu and yells that she is carrying his child. At this moment, the police blast through the ceiling and descend upon the town. The raid has begun. They start burning the place indiscriminately. Radnek tells them that they are to vacate the area for a refugee camp. They will be removed forcibly if needed. Then they demand the people hand over Mel. The priest steps in, calling them devils and possessors. He tells them this is a holy place and demands they leave. But Mel steps out and reveals herself. They ask if she is Ryu's girlfriend, and she asks them to take her to him. Radnek agrees and tells her he's in hell. He fires, and the priest jumps in front of her to take the bullet instead. Above, a parade is taking place for the mayor and the anniversary of the city, and he finally introduces himself on stage. He is Grimson Rockwell. He gives a speech about the founding of the city and its 50th anniversary. But below, all of the people of the Agents of God have been slaughtered. Every single one of them, including Mel, and her body is surrounded by dead children. It's not over, though. Mel calls out to Diana in the mandala world, and this awakes Elaine. Diana pleads with her not to do it, but she knows she cannot stop it. Mel calls out to Diana again. She asks if she's dead, and Diana pleads with her not to do what she is thinking. But Mel has made up her mind. Her child will never be born. She wants the city destroyed. And instantly, Elaine obliges and awakes Genocyber. A massive arm rockets up from below the street, grabbing Mayor Rockwell's car as he rides in the parade. It is lifted high into the air. The people stand in awe, and the new Genocyber is a kaiju. The car is crushed and thrust into a building. Then Genocyber turns to the people and blasts them with flames from its mouth. The police offer a reward, Whoever kills Genocyber gets elite citizenship, but as is shown by a tank blasting this new kaiju form, no one will be able to claim this reward. It's unaffected. Genocyber's neck extends to that of a dragon, and it breathes flames across the military men standing there, reducing all of them, including Radneck, to nothing. Genocyber takes flight, and in a cell, high in a building, Ryu hears Mel's voice. The building explodes, but Genocyber has saved him. He gazes at the monster as it reduces in size. High above, the dragon satellite has reactivated, remembering its purpose. Diana appears and declares that Ryu and Mel will not die, and Mel is given a body once more. She and Ryu plummet towards the city in a golden orb as Elaine and Diana are shown joined together in Genocyber once again. They fly to the satellite, which begins firing hundreds of lasers. Genocyber blasts its way inside, where it finds a TV displaying the image of the old man from the beginning of episode 4, repeating the same message over and over, demanding the satellite destroy its target. Something begins to happen. Genocyber kneels and is disabled. Ice begins to spread out from the body. It spreads and covers the satellite, and as it does, the satellite loses orbit and falls into the atmosphere. Mel awakes next to Ryu and hears the voice of Diana. Somewhere in the distance, in the direction of what looks like a massive Genocyber statue, a baby is crying. We fade out to the sound of soft violin, and then it's fairy dreaming one last time.